Hey everyone, I hope you guys are having a great day and welcome back to another Web Dev Junkie video. So in this video, I want to kind of give you an overview of how to use a custom React hook or how to write your own. Now the term custom hook kind of is off-putting to me mainly because it's really just a function that you call that abstracts calling other lower level hook methods in React. It's not like you're actually defining some like lower level custom hook that you can use to hook into React's lifecycle. It's just a function that you use and you basically call other hooks with it. So if you're interested in learning how to do something like that to build a quote unquote custom hook, be sure to stick around. I'm basically going to be showing you how I used a hook to build out this form validation. So on the right here, we have a form and the user can type into it and basically type in an email and password. And if they click on the submit button, it's going to highlight the input boxes that have errors. So in this case, the email is going to light up. But notice that when we first typed into the input boxes, there was no like live validation happening. It's only after you submit the form for the first time that it enables some type of live refresh on the validation. So now if I were to delete the password and go back, notice that it highlights the input password red. So I can go like this, and then to kind of do the validation on an email, I could type in like @example.com. And at this point we have a kind of a valid form here and we can click submit. Before I click submit, I wanted to show you that if I have a single invalid input here and click submit, notice that there's nothing printing out to the console down here. But if I do fulfill all of the validation and click submit, it's going to call a callback that we have hosted here. And I'll walk you through this in a second. But basically it just prevents a submit function from being called unless every field is valid. But I thought this was a pretty good example of, showing you how to use a custom hook to wrap a lot of the use state calls that you might need behind the scenes to implement this logic. So to look at the JSX, we have basically down here a form defined. So if you look here, we have a form that has an onSubmit function that's called when you submit the form. We got a submit button, which is going to basically make sure that that form's submitted when you press enter on the last input or click on the button. And then we have two sections that have an email and a password. Okay, so I'm wrapping both of these in a div that is dynamically adding an error class. And notice that the errors is coming back from our custom hook here. Again, I'll show this in a second. But then additionally, we just attach a generic onChange function or callback function to basically both of these inputs. So how this custom hook works behind the scenes is you basically call useForm and you pass it a object that has a validation key and also an onSubmit key. So the validation key is basically where you can define some custom validation if you do have any. So for example, this is a really hacky validation for email. I'm checking to make sure that the @ symbol is defined, and password, I'm just making sure someone typed into the password field. And then for the onSubmit callback, this is what you'd basically use to invoke Axios to hit your backend with the form if everything was good. So this won't be called unless all your inputs are valid. And as you type into the inputs and stuff is bad, this errors object is going to come back with true or false for the different keys. So if you notice here, we have name email. That key is going to correspond to the errors.email. This one, name of password, is going to correspond to errors.password. And we're using that to dynamically add an error class to the div that's wrapping these to turn the color red. All right, so that is basically the overview of all of this stuff. I mean, there's also like, we get back form here. This is just the value of the internal form of the hook. So when we're ready to submit, we have an actual email and we have an actual password, and you can pass that to your Axios request. Errors we kind of talked about. OnSubmit is what's going to call a couple of things inside this custom hook, and then onChange is going to basically listen for when a user types, and that is going to also update validation. So let's look at the meat and potatoes of this custom hook, because it is quite a bit of code. I mean, it's not that much code, but it is enough to kind of take time to digest. So again, this takes in that validation object and it takes in that onSubmit callback. And when the custom hook runs, we are initializing some state to keep track of the form of the input fields that are typed in. We keep track of the errors inside an object. And then we also keep track of if the form was submitted or not. And we default that to false. Okay. So now we have, we create a function, the onInput change, and that is what we're going to attach to our input fields to basically check if we need to add validation errors or whatnot. So notice here, it's pretty straightforward. We get the event, we get the name of the input, we get the value of the input, and we update that form object, okay? Now, what we also do is we check if the form was submitted or already submitted. That's when we actually need to update that errors object and put the validation state of those inputs, okay? So basically, we take the validations object, we invoke the key if it exists, and then we invoke the function if it exists. So basically, that is looking down here. So if someone types into email, it's grabbing this key, grabbing this function, and it's going to invoke that function to get back a true or false value, hopefully, and then set that on the errors. So if you do have an error, it's going to set true to the error key. Hopefully that all makes sense. And then the second piece of the puzzle is basically when you're submitting the form. So here, it's going to call an onSubmit button, or it's going to call an onSubmit method, which is actually returned from our custom hook here. And if we look at the implementation, we're basically just wrapping the onSubmit that was passed in here. So you see this is corresponding to this, and we are just doing some extra validation. So basically we set useForm submitted to true here, so that now when the user types in, we kind of do a live validation reset and show as, you know, if something's wrong. And if there are no errors, so we have a method here that basically loops through all of our validation object keys. We kind of set up the new errors object, and then we check if any of those are true here, then we know that the form has some errors, otherwise it doesn't. Let's see, we also set the errors on the state. So this is basically going to fire when you submit the form, just to double check that there's no validation errors on the form itself, and then return a true and false, which we basically use down here on line 37 to say, if there hasn't been any errors, then we can call the submit function, which we passed in, which is here, and it's going to print out form ready form. So just to kind of show you that again, if I try to submit this, it's going to block here because there is errors on the form. If I add an add symbol and click submit, it's going to reach this line because there are no errors and we get back the actual form. So as you can tell, there was quite a bit of logic that you have to use to kind of set up validation on a form to dynamically like show and hide validation errors and to prevent a form from submitting. And using a custom hook and just wrapping all that stuff can actually help clean up your code, because now on all the pages that you have a form, you could simply just bring in that hook, which is called useForm, pass it some configuration, and then you're good to go with getting the errors. Now you could take this a step further and probably make some more JSX components here. So this could be an actual component itself. Maybe you want to make your own input component, which just takes in, I don't know, the like errors and on submit and on change or something. I don't really know. Probably just on errors and on change. And you can kind of dry this code up even more. But I think it's good just to keep the building blocks. Like you're going to reach a certain point where you're kind of doing too much over engineering and refactoring, where like sometimes it's fine just to leave it as is. We could probably save some lines of code by abstracting this into another component, but I don't know. That's a choice you need to figure out, I guess. So the last thing I'll say is that, I mean, obviously you probably want to find a third-party library if you want to do some like form validation. Like this is just some custom stuff that I wrote just to kind of prove a point, but there's libraries out there that kind of do all this for you, and you don't have to waste time writing your own custom logic to verify forms and show validation. So just keep that in mind. But I hope this was a good learning example for you all. If you like this video, be sure to give me a thumbs up. Also, leave me a comment below if you have a favorite form validation library you like to use. And then, like always, if you're new to this channel, be sure to click the subscribe button, because I'm going to be showing you other React snippets and tutorials and JavaScript tutorials that can hopefully help you become a better web developer. All right, thank you so much for watching. Have a good day.